Hello, hello. Hey, Larissa. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. So, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yes, my name is Larissa May. My best friends know me as Lars, as well as our teens, and I'm a digital well-being trailblazer and serial entrepreneur. I started Half the Story 10 years ago, believe it or not, which was the first youth-centric nonprofit on a mission to empower the next generation's relationship with tech. So, in other words, I thought tech was going to be one of the biggest issues we would face as humanity. And I wanted to build a future where young people could have better relationships with it. So that's what brings me here. And I wear Half the Story on my sleeve and on my head and pretty much everything I do.
I think it's so important, the topics that you're dealing with for teens and also everyone, and also especially entrepreneurs too. I think the relationship with tech and social media in particular is really complicated and really all consuming. Uh, so, I mean, I'm sure if you're listening, you're like, yes. So, can you tell us a little bit about how on earth you sort of started this topic and why it's so passionate for you?
Yeah, I think like most founders, I started Half the Story because I needed something that didn't exist for myself. And when I was a college student, I was really representative of the first generation to grow up in the digital age. And I actually was a really creative young person. And I think even today, we still see there's so much upside for creativity in the digital world. However, I didn't have the emotional resilience skills, AKA, no one taught me how tech would impact my mood and my emotions, and that tech was actually a lot like food. And if we have too much of it or we're not consuming the right things, that it can really impact us. And so I unfortunately learned the hard way and almost lost my life because of my really complicated relationship with tech while navigating a myriad of mental health issues. And then realized that there had to be something to fix this. And even though I was doing everything like going to the gym, taking antidepressants, I realized that if I didn't reckon with the role that tech played in my life, that I would never actually fully heal. And that was in the moment when I realized social media is only half the story. And I became really curious about how it was impacting other young people, other entrepreneurs. And that was something that I became curious about and obsessed with 10 years ago. And obviously, I'm still here.
So, I guess let's start with today. What does your relationship with social media look like? What are some of those maybe easy to implement and hard to implement things that you are doing to make your relationship better?
Yeah, I think first off, digital wellness is an inside job. Most of the things that we navigate in our life are really a reflection of what's going on inside our world. And I always say, like, social media can actually be a window or a door. It can be a window into opportunity, it can be a window into understanding more about your own relationship, your own identity. And actually, tech is a really good reflection of oftentimes where our mental health is. If you've ever been to your For You page or your Instagram page, the content they're serving you is usually preying on those vulnerable pieces of your life. And I think the over the last 10 years, I'd say the first 5 years were probably still healing. And I think that service is a really great accompaniment to a healing journey and knowing that you're not alone in what you're going through. But I think there's like a couple of things that have really changed for me as an entrepreneur. So, first and foremost, I look at social media as really an extension of my business. I don't care if people like my stuff. I don't care if I get followers. I just really don't. I use social media as a way to educate the world and really stay connected and support people. And I think that shift from self service to service for others on the internet really made it a much more positive place for me. So when I show up there, I really ask myself, like, why am I here? What am I sharing with the world that's going to help someone else's life? And, is what I'm creating, is it supporting the world or is it destroying it? And I think really reframing that and getting outside of what do I look like? Did I get likes? Has been a big part of my journey. But I will also say that as an entrepreneur and a female entrepreneur, I've also really taken advantage of social media and media to move my mission and my business forward. And it's a massive part of what we do today. And it's a massive part of why I've been able to get access to amazing opportunities to move our organization forward. And I think that if you haven't done the work inside to actually navigate those stressors and to navigate what that reality is, it can be really destructive. So you just have to make sure that you're actually prepared to be on social media and that you can take care of yourself along the way.
And I think with entrepreneurs and probably just all humans too, like but especially with entrepreneurs, I think we get like obsessive or we can get obsessive with like the metrics, right? So there's sort of this two prong thing where it's like, okay, how are we showing up on social media? Maybe we get into a hole with our metrics and comparing chaps. Um, and then also it's the scrolling component. So I don't know, on the scrolling side of things, like, are there some health things that you have implemented to reduce your scrolling or to make your scrolling more intentional?
Yes. So, I guess first and foremost, I think one of the most important takeaways here is that not all screen time is created equal. And the same way that we say not all food is the same when you put it in your body. And what I mean by that is your intention is oftentimes much more important than just the action that you're taking. And when you come onto social media or any platform, in the same way that you might intentionally decide to put on an outfit or socks or pack your lunch, we need to apply that same intention to the digital world. And if you show up, you have two options. One is to go one direction, which is to have an intention and to go in and contribute and learn. And the other is to just mindlessly go there because it's easier than actually coping with your emotions. And to actually be able to define, understand, and recognize the difference between when you're actively and passively consuming technology can change your life. And so for me, I've really tried to build that intention in. But the other thing is that, look, tech was built to hack us. And instead of being victims, let's be player of the game. So I often like to think about, like, how do I put myself in the shoes of these engineers and build speed bumps in a digital world where they don't exist, or create that seatbelt because we haven't had a national legislation passed in 30 years that protects young people online. And some of the ways that I do that are, one, by manipulating the colors on my phone. So the more colors you see, the more engaged you are. So actually going into grayscale, which is initially a disability feature that was created. The second thing I like to do is find ways to slow the scroll, quite literally. And ways to do that are creating these little micro bumps, like logging out of your social media when you're done, or making social media really hard to access, like hiding it in a couple folders back. So you really have to go dig in and find that platform and think about it. And the other thing that I've done as well is actually just have other accounts that I use solely for inspiration. I mean, my work is really demanding, to be honest. Like, my demands and the pressure that I feel from the internet is not, do people give me likes or follows? Like, the pressure that I feel is that I get emails and texts and DMs from people that are like, my child is suffering and their life is at risk. And to like learn how to create boundaries around that while also being in service is really tough. And so my challenges have completely changed from myself to now, like, trying to save other people. And the stakes are really high, and I think it's really tough, but you have to figure out how to protect your peace. um i I think social media, it's always an evolution, and I think we oftentimes don't recognize that even things like Netflix and LinkedIn are also social media. Most adults I know are somewhat attached to their email in an unhealthy way, even sometimes myself, and we're in high stress situations. And I think we just have to take a beat and remember that we're humans at the end of the day, even though technology tries to get us to think we're something different.
Have you ever like implemented like intentional time for social media or any sort of like
Yeah.
structure in that capacity?
Yeah, I think when I was on my journey of healing, I think one of the things that, and we were actually just talking to a bunch of parents about this week, is that sometimes when like parents only give their kids screen time on the weekends, then you get that like binge behavior where they're like looking forward to the weekends and all they want to do is scroll. And so for me, I mean, to be completely transparent with you, I'm at a point in my life as a founder where I have like almost lost track of my own schedule. Like, I do not have control over it. I wake up, I go to yoga, my team tells me what I need to do. I have a lot of meetings a day. And so my journey is, quite frankly, like not the journey of everyone. And so for me, when I'm not working, being on social media is not what I'm running to. I'm running to yoga, I'm running to meditation, I'm running to like being with three friends and running away from the world because that's really safe and just pleasurable and nice. But I will say, like, I think for me, what I'm trying to do is if I'm going to scroll, like I'll just set a timer for 5 minutes. That's like, okay, you have 5 minutes to kind of like, in the same way that we might have pulled, like read like a Cosmo magazine 20 years ago. Like you've got 5 minutes to just like let go. You've got 5 minutes to watch your Desperate Housewives on social media, whatever that version of junk consumption is. And sometimes we need that. And I think that's the other thing too, is like sometimes we need a break, and screens are not the best ways to soothe necessarily, but sometimes it's like the only way that we know how, that's literally within reach. And so I think it's about grace. And I also think it's about redefining, like, what do you want to get out of your time online? Because if we know the average American teenager will spend 30 years of their life on the internet, and the average human will probably not be that far off from that as an adult, like, there's just, life is short. Time is a treasure. It's a non-renewable resource. And like, do you really want to spend it giving Mark Zuckerberg more money when he has $100 billion? Like, probably not.
Okay, so taking a little step back for those beginning stages of your journey and sharing this with other folks in the form of the nonprofit, can you tell us a little bit more about those early days and what that looked like?
Oh yeah. So how it all began is I actually started by getting a $250 grant. And I printed like large, these are like little funny paddles that we use in our classroom, but I printed half the story stickers and I handed them out to young people. And I basically spent my days interviewing young people about their stories from all over the world. And so they would submit stories through the hashtag half the story. And that was really how it began, was just a grassroots movement of young people. And then I was able to leverage my network in fashion at the time to start to get some individuals that had platforms involved to talk about this. This is like back in 2015, like the perfect avocado toast era, which is like an era for those of you that are listening. We all remember that time. And I was in college and I didn't have a lot of money, but I was really passionate about this. And, I did I drew a logo on a piece of paper. My friend designed it. Like there were a lot of different iterations of it, but it was like me and my friends coming together to try to build this. And as we graduated and moved on, it became much more challenging because we didn't really have money to run this. And I think as a founder, like there's always that period where you're like calling in your friends to do stuff and people are working for free. And then you start to burn bridges because they're like, why aren't you paying me? And I'm like, I'm not, no one's making money here. And like, that was actually really tough. And I think like I actually, like looking back on it, one of the things that people don't tell you when you're building a business is like sometimes you lose friends, because like you rely on them and you're building and you think you're like doing this thing together. And then ultimately someone feels burned when they're not being compensated, even if no one's making money. And that was a real part of my story. But then I moved to New York and I actually was the first employee at two consumer businesses, one of them being Kin Euphorics, which I'm drinking today and I love, which is a functional non alcoholic beverage. And I've always been really passionate about like building new categories and new things. And we were really one of the first. And I was bootstrapping and moonlighting on half the story on nights and weekends. And I actually had left my other job because I thought I wanted to do half the story full time, but the world just wasn't ready yet. The world was not ready to hear that technology is not good for humanity. And when you're too early, sometimes that's like just as hard as, if not harder, as being too late. Because there's no bandwagon to get on. And so I would kind of at least like just chip away at the mission and raise money. And I actually, it was funny because I just had a call with our accountant and we started working with them and we had like a $10,000 budget, which is crazy. And I bootstrapped on nights and weekends by public speaking and like put a lot of my own money into it and fell. And just honestly, it's been like the true spiritual conquest of a lifetime. And like, I think a lot of people join social impact because it's flashy or because they want to have like a public affiliation with a mission. But to be honest, like I've really built this from nothing into what it is today. And so I guess I just come at it from like this very deeply spiritual place of like, this has like really been my life's work. And I put everything on the line to make this happen. I even left New York and like moved to an attic of a barn to like do this full time. Like that's the level and the extent to which I did this in my mid 20s. Like no one does that. So I'm just sharing that because for those of you that see where I am today, there's been massive sacrifice. And there's still that sacrifice. Like my life is not normal at all. And I work way more than most people do. And I have amazing life and experiences, but it comes at a really big cost. And I think like if you find something that you're willing to put everything on the line for, it's a real gift, but it's just like your entire life really is that. Like it's not like here's your life, here's work. It's like you are living this thing and that is what it is to be an entrepreneur. And I don't know, I just want to be really honest about that because I think it's glamorized a lot. Obviously, we all lived through that girl boss era and like it's so much deeper than that.
So, with teens, what are some of these things that you are seeing? What are the ways that you're helping? Let's go with that. What are the ways that you're helping with teens?
Yeah. So, as an organization, our mission is to empower the next generation's relationship with tech. And what I mean by that is that teens are the center of everything that we do. And we co create with them, we build with them, and we have a couple of key programs. So, one is Social Media U, which is our play based, school based intervention. These are some of our little artifacts from that, where we teach kids from middle school through high school how to be resilient emotionally in the digital age. And from there, we also have our Teen Advisory Board, which is our group of teens that we co create with from all over the United States. And then we have our Civics Academy, which is a program that we launched this year in 40 cities. It's a 1 week boot camp where we train teenagers that are really engaged and passionate about the digital wellness movement on how to make change in their own communities. And so that could be creating a club, that could be going to pitch a bill to Congress. But I kind of hacked my way through this, and there was a lot of things that I wish I knew and I had. And so that's really what the goal of this program is.
So, what are some of those hardships that you're seeing in the teen communities?
I mean, one of the biggest things is that we're in one of the greatest loneliness epidemics that humanity has ever seen. And that's really because technology and humanity are converging. We're replacing a lot of time that should be spent with humans with tech. And as a result, kids are sleeping less, they're spending less time with their friends, less times with their family. And when you take the human needs and reduce them to basically nothing, of course there's a mental and emotional crisis. And so I think I like to talk a lot about the opportunity cost of tech because there's actually like a bit of tension in the scientific community around correlation versus causation. And there's still so much research that's happening and being unpacked. The second thing I'll say is that I'm seeing a lot of teens feel more pressure than any other generation to have everything figured out by the age of 18. I think you don't have to be 18 years old, be running 3 clubs, start a business, all those things. Like the stakes are so high. And I feel like kids don't have the space to be kids anymore. There is no safety net in the digital world. And a lot of the way that the digital world has been introduced to them is that the digital world is more of a digital dungeon and they should be afraid. And as a result, I think a lot of our kids are acting out of fear and they're acting out of deficit and they're doing things that they wouldn't necessarily mean to do. And as a result, we're seeing bullying, we're seeing depression, suicide attempts, and the list goes on to ultimate that are honestly increasing, and it's scary.
So, I mean, you've been talking about how really empowering teens to like deal with this issue on their own. Can you talk a little bit more about that? I mean, maybe we can talk about the parental side and then also like from the teen, like why is it teens' responsibilities to make their health okay in relationship to tech?
Well, first things first is that tech is not going anywhere. Ultimately, for teens, I think you can lead a horse to water, but unless they really decide to take care of themselves, then, nothing's going to happen. And for most teens, their parents don't even know how to handle this because no one taught their parents. So you have teens that have no rule book, you have parents that have no rule book to parenting, and then it turns into a bit of a chaotic mess because schools are the middlemen and women that are taking on the burdens of the kids and the parents when they're really not even equipped either. And so I think what we really believe in a tops down and bottom up approach, which is we know we need to work with government. We know we need to work with stakeholders and the educational leaders, and we need to like create systems and make digital wellness the new wellness and a new class that kids have in school. But on the flip side is that if we don't give kids tools to be empowered, we don't give them grants to have their own screen free events. We don't give them the tools that they need to make a difference in their own community, then they're not going to do anything. And you and I both know that in our lives, no one has really scared us in the long term change. Like all of the things that we've chosen to do our personal awakenings that we've had. And so I think for us, we want to wake kids up from the inside out, get them to really think about, how do I want to spend my time? Do I want to have a screen-free event? And then actually build in gamified experiences in the classroom, outside of the classroom, to help them really be empowered and have that skill set, and to know that they don't have to just be the victim of the digital world. They can actually be in power. But it takes a lot of learning. It takes understanding, like, how do our emotions get impacted by different things that happen in the digital world? Like, what is the difference between depression and anger? What is the difference between endless scroll and, all of these different features that keep us hooked? And so we want to, knowledge is power. We can't change the fact that technology is here, but what we can do is be empowered about what we consume and how we do it, in the same way that some of us have been very blessed to learn about the food that we eat and what we put in our body. And so I'm really just trying to get us out of this idea that, like, technology is a drug into technology is food. It's a social determinant of health. It's something we need to connect, to tell our stories, and to, most importantly, educate and move forward economically in society, especially for our kids from the most marginalized communities. So that's kind of my point of view. And as of now, it's been working, and we've simultaneously building one of the largest bodies of digital flourishing research, with the hopes that we can have more data to help inform policymakers, decision makers, regarding the unique challenges that young people are facing.
So you've mentioned food a few times. And I'm someone who has been introduced to intuitive eating. That's been like a big part of my story. And I'm wondering if that can be kind of applied to tech or not really, because I don't know. Any thoughts on intuitive,
Yeah,
or
I
like
think
does tech
I think
ruin
that
business?
intuitive is knowing your needs at the end of the day, and actually being present to what those needs are. And I would actually say that, sometimes we need to go online and we need to look at pug memes. Like, I literally just sent one to Siobhan, my amazing publicist, today, and it was like, your dog gets sad when you have your luggage because he knows you look homeless most other days. Like, and that means you're going to leave and go somewhere. And, like, sometimes you need that, because we need comedy, we need relief, and sometimes you just need to, like, zoom out and look at old photos of your family online, and, like, that's great too. But I think, like, sometimes the thing about intuitive technology consumption is that that's, like, extra deepened awareness. I think some people are just still trying to figure out fight or flight. It's like you move from fight or flight into stability, into being able to discern active versus passive tech consumption, and then move into a place where you can be intuitive to your own needs and others. And so I would say that, because you've been on that journey from a food perspective, you might be more likely and able to apply that to your digital experience. But I would say that you're probably much further along than most people. And tech's always changing all the time, and it's always adapting and moving towards us. And that's one of the things that I think is the greatest challenge, and also kind of what keeps us going every day, is that it's changing every day. There's no day where we wake up and tech is the same. It's always evolving. And so it's, that's also one of our big challenges.
And so I think what's so interesting about the teens and kids generation is that they've grown up with social media their entire life. I don't know. Do you have anything to speak to that? Like, in terms of, us, Instagram came around when I was in college, at end of college. Some of these parents maybe, got social media later. What is that? I don't know. Anything to say about that?
Yeah, I think for right now, for kids, we oftentimes, adults say, well, what do you think about their online world versus their offline world? And to be really frank with you, our kids are living in a digital world. And that was the one that they were born into. And I think we need to start getting into the mindset that, like, tech is really at the core of their experience. It's not just an extension of it, it's at the core of it. And that's the difference between the generations that grew up without tech and the ones that didn't.
So, is there any sort of way that you're also prepping kids for tech relationships too? Or like how we can prep with our like younger kids to start having more intentional relationships with tech?
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that question up. I think one of the biggest things I always like to say is that the moment your baby sees blue light, their digital wellness journey begins. And from elementary school through high school, we're really focused on educating kids in school and after school. But before that, we know that it's really the role of the parent to start establishing those boundaries. And one of the things that I actually recently developed was, and I'm happy to share it with your followers, it's not technically public yet, but I'm building a new business that's really built for parents. And it's called the Founding PTA, which is the Parent Technology Association. And we actually just developed a survey to help parents understand what type of parenting style they have in the digital world, because how we parent online and offline looks really differently. And some of us are, authoritative offline, but free spirits online. And those different things play out in very different ways. And I think one of the things that we want to do is to be able to support more parents. And so I'm actually hosting biweekly workshops with doctors and psychiatrists for the first 250 members of the group. And that's really because we know that a lot of these habits and the things that we set start before our kids even have their own devices. And so I'm happy to share that information with your community as well. It's still kind of it's kind of like, if you know, you know. I haven't announced it publicly yet, but that's largely why we're doing it, because so many parents don't know what to do for toddlers and younger.
So, is there like tangible data about like how much screen time is too much, or is it more about intentionality, or what sort of stats can you share with us for kids and teens and adults?
Yeah, I mean, so I think the first thing, and I'll kind of put on my psychiatrist's hat right now, is that for kids under the age of 2, it is not suggested to have your kids be using devices. And we already are starting to see, there's an incredible lab at the Winston Lab at Chapel Hill that's doing fMRI imagery, that basically is showing that kids' actual brain development is being impacted by actually engaging with their screen. So they're starting to see that there's real cognitive shifts, which is really scary. When it comes to screen time in general, like going back to my earlier comment, like not all kids are equal, not all screen time is equal. So for kids that are neurodivergent, how they use technology and the amount of time they spend looks really different. And what we often like to say is that you absolutely, as your rule of thumb, should not be using more tech than you are socializing or sleeping. And if your child is using their screen more than they are sleeping, that is probably a sign that they're spending too much time there. There's growing data that, and we're just starting to see like how this is impacting memory and development, but there are really two camps to a lot of this research. And we're still so early. Like 10 years ago when I started this work, there was no research. Right now, we're just starting to see some of these correlations between anxiety, depression, and suicide. We know that 1 in 3 girls feels worse about their bodies when they're on social media, and that's a fact that we know. But in terms of how that's going to impact their development socially, cognitively over time, we're hoping that there's going to be more RCTs or randomized control trials that are going to be able to tell that. And our hope is that we're going to be able to do more of that as well.
So, yeah, what are some of these like tangible skills that we can use for our own relationship with screen time?
Yeah, I think well, you could take that a lot of ways. I think if you're do you want me to approach that through the lens of entrepreneur, a parent, a kid? What way do you want
Um,
me to take it?
well, I guess let's start with let's do entrepreneurs. Why not?
Yeah.
Those of you listening.
Okay. So for entrepreneurs, I think there's a couple of non-negotiables. Is like, one, you need to have dedicated space, make space for magic, and there needs to be like 1 hour a day that you give yourself to think. Like you have to build that in. Taking your phone out of the bedroom is one of the most important things you can do. Like actually getting an alarm clock or using your Alexa to wake you up is fine, but if you're going to bed and waking up with your inbox, like that's not good for you, and you should tangibly be going to take that away. The second thing I'll say is really find ways to lower expectations of others. And so one of the things that I do when I'm overwhelmed is I'll throw up an email away message that says, "Hey, part of my pause while we build, I'm really overwhelmed. I'm prioritizing fundraising calls, period. If you want anything else, like reach out to my team." I also do the same on text, where I will manipulate a do not disturb feature on my phone so that when I'm working, people will get a text message. I all the time get random calls and texts from people. I don't know how the heck they have my number, and that's a whole other question, but like you have to protect your peace and the amount of inbounds that you're getting on a daily basis as a founder. The other thing I'll say is that if you want to take it really far, like getting a light phone for the weekends that doesn't have email or doesn't have social media on it, so that like literally you just have analog, like that is a way that if you're really bad at boundaries, you can ultimately tap in. And then the last thing I'll say is like actually, making it hard to access the all of these things on your computer or your phone. So like using things like freedom apps so that you can actually block out apps and like be really focused and in your flow zone. Like multitasking is a myth. You cannot multitask. If you're multitasking, it means that you're giving two things half of your brain. And in the digital world and as founders that just have a lot of things going on, like we can't multitask. And I think we're tempted to do it because we think that it's more productive, but our best work doesn't happen when it gets half of our brain. Our best work happens when it gets our whole brain and our whole heart. And I think the other thing is like having a really good backup team, like having an executive assistant that can make sure that you have spaces and time where you're actually reducing the amount of inbounds that are coming to you is so critical. And I don't think I learned that early enough. You need to have systems. Like you can't have 1,000 people sending you little micro messages on a daily basis that you're exposing yourself to. And I'll say, like, you actually need to dedicate about an hour to a week just to customer service and like random acts of kindness. So, like, I have like an hour a week where I dedicate to responding to people on DMs or responding to our customer service inbox. I think a founder should always have access to that inbox. It shouldn't always be them, but you always need to make space to be present to the bottom of the funnel because those are the people that are going to keep your business alive. And to be honest, like, your team might shield you from a lot of things that you might actually want to know. And that's the best way to figure it out.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of really good points right there. I just want to sort of repeat them back. So, taking the phone out of the room, I think is so important. I have personally done that through times and space and currently am not doing that through my time and space. So maybe I will reiterate that, make that happen again. This idea of away messages, I think is really cool. For both your inbox and or text message. I don't know about how to make an away message on text message, but that's fascinating. Let's look into that. And yeah, this idea of having set time to talk to your people, I think that's really important. And sort of the twofold of that, like having a team member protect you from that stuff because that stuff can be really toxic. It can be really hurtful. It can be just even debilitating, right? Like that's not what you were planning on doing today, and you see something and that sort of derails you. And also creating an intentional space to look at that stuff when you're ready and sitting and sitting down for it and like open to hearing from those folks. I think all of that was really good.
Yeah, and I will say, and this is an analog tool, but here's what I'll say is like as a founder, it's so important to have ways to like stay creative and offline. And one of the ways that I do that is I always have like a box of note cards and I write notes like all the time. And for people that are very ADHD, love to do lots of things, like a way for me to calm is an active meditation. The way that I can do that if I'm not actively meditating is through writing note cards, through knitting, sometimes just like cleaning my room. Like I think we have to have those places that we can go to when we are feeling completely overwhelmed. And I'm learning that those sort of hacks in our life that aren't digital, but like the things that can still keep you engaged without spinning out are so important. And I'll also say that I've enacted this new thing called my bad day box where I put in all these letters and like articles and amazing things that have happened in my career that I use, and like even letters from my grandma. And when things are hard, I go to my bad day box and I read the stories of impact from teens or people that we've touched. And like that to me is really helpful. And it's a super small hack, but sometimes like you just need a reminder that the world's not ending.
I think that's beautiful. And I want to talk about two things too. The cleaning thing I think is really interesting because when I'm stressed, that's the first to go. Like I'm not cleaning shit. But I've been thinking about cleaning as an intentional act lately, as like sort of a love letter to my space. And we can even get witchy with it, right? It can be like a spell for your space.
A spell
That
for your space.
yeah, I feel like that has really sort of shifted my mindset around cleaning. And what a like beautiful analog thing to like give back to your space that like nurtures you. So that's something I wanted to point out. And then, yeah, I like the bad day box. I think that's really cool. I've been sort of thinking about a dopamine menu. I know a lot of people do that.
Yes.
Um, ADHD, right? Not knowing what to do for fun is something that I'm really struggling with. Like, right, like I have these big things that I could do. I could go to the ceramic studio, but like that's a 3-hour process, right? Or
It's
like,
overwhelming in itself. It turns what's
yeah,
supposed to be meditative
yeah.
into mind blowing.
What's something I can pick up for like the next 20 minutes, or like something that's
Yes.
really accessible that I don't also need to like clean up a shit ton, and like what are these, yeah, what are these ways to really access
Yeah.
creativity or calmness or whatever you're working with. I think those can be really helpful. I even like, I this is back to tech, I guess. I almost want to have a TV menu too. Like, so I
Ooh.
know what show I'm watching, cuz like
Yep.
sometimes I have a comedy, right? You have your show with your husband, like you have, I think I kind of want to like print that
I
out.
love that. Like I love that. And that's actually a really good point of like I think having, and we've been talking about this with our kids in the spirit of dopamine menu of like, what is your toolbox of the places that you go digitally that make you feel good? Like, if we know that sometimes it's easier, it's hard to go from online to offline, but like, how do you go from dark online to bright online, then to offline? And it's baby steps. And so I love that. I'm like, it took me like an hour to figure out how to sign up for HBO Max the other night, and like that's a me problem, but I think like once I figure out how to better log on to my platforms and I can start focusing on the TV dopamine menu.
Yes. I mean, keep in mind I haven't done that yet, but it is on, it's right here. I mean, even just thinking about like food stuff too, like I think choice can be really debilitating. So like doing a little intentional work about like, okay, these are my lunch options. This is what we're gonna have for dinner. That saves a lot of time in your brain.
Oh yeah, you can only make so many choices a day. That's what I like to say. So when people say, "What do you want for lunch?" I'm like, I don't care anything, anything. Just order me two of whatever you're getting. But no, I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's really good. Like I always say creativity is an act of mental well-being, and I think having those spaces to create and those tools, whether they're big or small, could be as small as just having stickers that you decorate, on your laptop with, can make a big difference.
So what's next for you? You've talked a little bit about gearing stuff towards like kids and their parents. Is that sort of the next big endeavor, or anything else that you can share with us?
Yeah, so basically my big thing that I'm launching is the founding PTA with my best friend who's an addiction psychiatrist, and this is a community, a newsletter and group for parents to ultimately get support in the digital age on how to parent. And we knew that parents needed community. They wanted to have expert spaces to talk to doctors because oftentimes there isn't that space. So I'm launching that, which is ultimately going to be the precursor to a tool that I'm working on that will be launching in Q1 of next year to help with all of this. So that's kind of my next big thing. Obviously, half the story is continuing to grow and scale. And I'm just really excited to now be branching out further in the ecosystem and expanding my impact with parents because half the story will always be teens first. And I really wanted to create a space to serve parents because they need it. So
Well, this has been so helpful and enlightening. Can you tell us where we can find you?
yes. You can find me at Living Like Lars on social media or Half the Story. And if you want to join the Founding PTA, you can just look us up at Founding PTA on Instagram or thefoundingpta.com. And we're actually sending out amazing craft boxes in like our welcome bags for the first members that are going to be totally up your alley. So, if anyone wants to join, we'll send them out. But I just like really appreciate your time. And I know it takes a lot to prep and do podcasts and doing it on a Friday right before the weekend. So it's always nice to meet other empowering women and just really appreciate you giving me the space to share my story.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Right back at you. I mean, I think this has been so helpful for those of us who have been thinking about our relationship with tech and, having kids who are starting to manage tech, et cetera, et cetera. So I think you're doing really amazing work. And yeah, thank you so much.